Let's go ahead and get started. I'm so pleased to welcome Dino Robinson, who is the founder of Shorefront Legacy Center. He might tell you just briefly, I actually wasn't sure how to describe what Shorefront Legacy Center was exactly in the announcements this morning. I kind of stumbled, so maybe he can give us a little bit of background about what Shorefront is, and then move right along into our topic for today, which is the project on reparations in Evanston. So welcome, Dino.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well and
Good
surviving
morning.
this age of COVID and virtual services and virtual life and virtual everything.
Virtual everything.
Right.
Again, my name is Dino Robinson, and I am the founder of and established the Shorefront and Shorefront Legacy Center, which documents the African American community on Chicago's suburban North Shore. I started this project because of what other local historical societies were not doing, and the African American experience on the North Shore has been virtually ignored, other than the narrative of that of domestics and servants. So what I want to do is create an archive where people do research and find out a lot more of what was happening within the community of who I call entrepreneurs, who came to the North Shore for the very same reasons everybody else did, for better life, education, religion, and able to build their own communities. And out of that, as early as 1860, you had three distinct communities developing the North Shore, one in Evanston, Glencoe, and in Lake Forest. And some of our early research, we found that the earliest church that was established, African American church that was established in the North Shore, was established in Lake Forest in 1860, and had a church edifice about 5 or 6 years later after that, and it stayed active until 1920. And the building was torn down in 1972, so now it's part of Lake Forest College campus. So just around that church where it was located was a Black community in Lake Forest. So over time, these communities are slowly eroding away, and Shorefront wanted to be in a position where we could start documenting and archiving the communities here and activities that affect change and brought a lot of benefits to the community over the course of years, over the decades. But not only change here in the North Shore, but nationally and globally with personal histories and organizational advocacy. So that's what Shorefront does. We do put together exhibits, publications. We have an online journal, and we just keep plugging away. And the more we do, the more of a valid resource we have become in the Chicago metro area, but also throughout the country. So that's about it.
Thank you so much. Yes, that was very helpful. I wasn't sure earlier if I should call it a historical society or a library or what. It has kind of you guys do a mix of things.
Right. It functions more like a library than anything else. So it's a library that has non-circulating materials, meaning that you cannot check it out of the building. You can utilize it there. You can research it there. You can use the archives. We have publications, but you can only use them there.
Yes, and it is in the basement of a Methodist church, I believe, right? Can you tell us where it's located? Because they do have hours right now.
Right.
So if you'd like to stop by with your mask and everything, what's the location?
The location's on the corner of Ridge and Noyes Street in Evanston. It's 2214 Ridge Avenue in the lower level of Sherman United Methodist Church, which is historically an African-American church. And I think the only church in Evanston that's named after an African-American woman, Lula B. Sherman, who first held services of that denomination and that congregation in her home. And the congregants decided to name the church after her. So we have open hours on Saturdays from 10 till 2. For serious researchers, graduate study student researchers, we can make arrangements for visitation during the weekdays as well for longer term research. So we've had hosted quite a few interns in graduate studies and students who are working on their practicum to finish their dissertations, their independent studies, and create product from that, either a report, a book, documentary movies. Author Rachel Swarns used some of Shorefront's archives and information for her book, American Tapestry, which charted the legacy of Michelle Obama, whose great grandmother at one time lived in Evanston, Illinois.
Mhm.
So speaking of Evanston, we really are interested in learning about this reparations project that Evanston is doing, and we probably will need you, if you're willing, to give a little background information about, what reparations even is, how would you define it, what the goals of it are, why you believe that it's needed, and then where things are in the process with Evanston and how that compares to other communities. We just have lots of things we want to hear. So please start wherever you think makes the most sense.
Well, historically, reparations started right after the Civil War with Reconstruction. However, that was abruptly ended. So the former enslaved residents of the United States were denied reparations, and instead the reparations were handed over to white slave owners and plantation owners for the loss of slaves and their land. And the African American community was left out of that whole process. Jim Crow enacted, and throughout the country, you had the Black community always trying to advocate for its independence and for equal access to all laws and equal access to opportunities in the United States. That throughout the decades have always been denied, sometimes through legal action and other times through violence. So over a course of time, we had this accumulation of pockets of history where we tend to focus on in our history books, one of them including the Civil Rights Movement during the 1950s and 60s. However, what a lot of people don't realize is that the Civil Rights Movement started long before that, as early as 1900. It was called something different then. So a lot of times fighting against Jim Crowing, fight for, just equal access, becoming American citizens. So there are different movements, but what we remember, in this generation is the 50s and 60s civil rights movements. But it's all the same. It's all continuous. Throughout this time period too, you had different organizations such as the NAACP, which started out as the Niagara movement in New Bedford. What's interesting, little piece of history there, Evanston's first African-American alderman, Edwin B. Jourdain Jr., who was elected in 1931, his father, Edwin Jourdain Sr., was one of the organizing members of the Niagara movement in New Bedford that became the NAACP. And his function then too was to fight about reparations, to fight about equal justice in the United States so that people of color can live freely and achieve freely in these United States. So these discussions sometimes may seem new, but it's actually being recycled over and over again. So I'm going to bring it way forward to HR 40 that was introduced in the 1980s by members of the Congress to start doing research on reparations and what it means. What does it look like? Is there a financial model to it? Is there an organizational model to it? And that has stalled in Congress forever and still being stalled in Congress. The city of Evanston in 2002, under Alderman Lionel John Baptiste, forwarded HR 40 to the city council in good faith support of its cause of reparations. What can be done to help alleviate or remedy the harm and damage done by the African American community throughout its history. By a majority, the council, Evanston City Council, adopted that resolution in support. And during that support in City Council, we had scholars and residents speak on behalf of HR 40 and the importance of reparations work. Then it was quiet again for a while, and it wasn't until 2015, 2016, when there was a resurgence in discussions about inequities in Evanston. Now, this hasn't really stopped. There's always been like a small pools of opportunity to do something. In 2012, there was an opportunity to establish a neighborhood school back in the Fifth Ward. In Evanston, the Fifth Ward is historically the African-American community that was redlined out of all of Evanston, that allowed banks not to invest in that area. There was one neighborhood school in that area, and when it opened in 1905, it was predominantly white, but within 35 years, it became 85% African-American, and then 10 years later after that, 99% African-American student body. So you had that discussion with the reenactment of trying to enact a new school in the Fifth Ward that failed. And some of the reasons that why it failed is that other wards thought it was not necessary. So you had wards passing a determination of what a particular ward should have or should not have. And that really created a rift in just resources that are available. So this, the discussion about the Fifth Ward School ended up on our ballot as a referendum. Tied to that ballot were improvements to all the other elementary schools and middle schools in Evanston to include STEM school extensions. So at the vote, the Fifth Ward School failed, but every other school got their improvements to their buildings. The other reason why people were against it is that they felt that their taxes were going to rise. And that was patently and statistically false. A school bond had just ended, everybody's taxes were going down. With a new bond, taxes would have gone back up, but it still would have been lower from what it used to be. So taxes, as a gross, as a net, would have been less anyway. It would have been a perfect opportunity to build a new structure in the Fifth Ward. And third, final reason why the school failed is that these other wards felt that their neighborhood school would lose its diversity. And they were fearful of losing their diversity. So they wanted to keep the status quo with a very small minority percentage at their schools and still not have any schools in the Fifth Ward. So that kind of caused a rift. And we're bringing it forward to recent times where there's been issues with city governance and how the city governance engages with the community. So Alderman Fleming, who's of the 7th Ward, I believe, she introduced a resolution for race and equity training for city staff. That passed last June, June 2019 by City Council. On the back of that, the Race and Equity Commission commissioned a exhibit to display in Evanston called Undesign the Red Line. So that was about redlining in the United States. And the same committee contracted Shorefront to do an exhibit on redlining in Evanston. And I don't know if I'm able to share, am I able to share a screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna show you this one slide here. And when I talk about redlining, I was trying to illustrate this a little bit better. This is the city of Evanston's Hope map. And redlining, this red area right here is the Fifth Ward. This Hope map was done in the 1940s. And the Fifth Ward almost fits perfectly the same red area here and is designated as D2, David 2. That is the lowest ranking you can have in community valuation. And what this did is that it divested anything in that community. So if you lived in the Fifth Ward or in the D2 district, it would be extremely difficult or next to impossible to get a mortgage from a bank because banks will not lend to that. If you want to start a business in that area, banks will not give you a business loan because it's deemed not an area to invest in. The higher areas like B's and A's were always highly desired, and by all means, banks should always loan in those communities and always invest in those communities. However, a D level says do not do so. And over time, that gave an appearance of inequity, or it did give inequity into that community, and also guided perception of what a community is. So all through Evanston's history, even with Northwestern students coming to Evanston or people moving to Evanston in general, where should we live? Always people had said, stay out of the Fifth Ward because it's dangerous. Now, I've lived in the Fifth Ward for 23 years now, and I don't see any sense of any danger anywhere. In fact, areas that are more heavily crime-ridden in Evanston, which is kind of interesting, is closer to Howard Street, this area here. I've constantly left my garage door open by accident overnight, and not one single item's been stolen out of there. In fact, I have neighbors coming over to me and say, hey, your garage door was open. We closed it for you. So there is a community here that is doing things. But in guiding perception, kind of giving you an idea, this is what was circulating in the map on the internet back in 2008. If we were to live in Evanston, where should we live? And somebody put this map up and drew these lines on there, sharing where to go. And this no area is the Fifth Ward that overlays specifically with the D2 district. So that guiding perception from then, the Hope map, which codified racial segregation in Evanston, made a long history of divestment within that community. So I just wanted to share those two slides to kind of illustrate some of the things that we're dealing with. So with the InDesign, the red line, undesigned, the red line exhibit, Evanston did an Evanston redlining exhibit. And that really opened the eyes to a lot of people in Evanston about the racial disparities. You can talk about it, people can go to city council and protest about it, write letters about it. But when you start seeing visual graphics of how the community is impacted and its long-term effects, that's when people started really taking it seriously. So right on the heels of Alderman Fleming with the racial equity training for the city council, the recreational marijuana cannabis tax took hold, and City of Evanston has a dispensary. And that entitled Evanston to tax sales from recreational cannabis. And it equated to about 3%, which have the potential over 10 years to raise about $10 million. So immediately, Alderman Simmons of the Fifth Ward, as she was formulating some type of reparations program, trying to figure out how this can be funded, she jumped on the in learning that the recreational marijuana tax was going to be put into the general fund. She said, well, why not put a purpose to it and let it fund some initial programming for reparations? And that kind of gave the whole city council some pause. But because of the chain of events that were happening with the city of Evanston, with protests, fight for Black Lives Matter, issues with police reinforcement, the educational gap that's been recorded by OPAL, this is an organization in Evanston, all these things are piling up, and the city knew they had to do something. I think somebody asked, what year was that for the recreational marijuana tax? Just happened last year, 2019. So we're implementing that. And right now, the first funds coming in for the reparations money was just deposited to the city bank account this past month. Right now, it's only about $14,000, but we expect, we're projecting about $150,000 by end of first quarter of 2021. So I kind of lost my train of thought here, sorry. So with the recreational tax money, the city council unanimously voted for it, except for one alderman. He voted against it, but he's consistent with voting against any tax use of anything. So he stayed true and consistent to what his beliefs are, fiscal beliefs are, but in spirit and in practicality, he does support reparations work. The issues going on now with reparations work, community members are trying to define what reparations is. not to conflate it with what's happening on a national model of reparations. We're very focused on local reparations. So things that the city of Evanston had caused that can be remedied through our own neighborhood programming. However, there was one issue with the cannabis tax money to use for programming. It has to be highly regulated through the city of Evanston. So for many, it kind of negated the whole concept of reparations. And too many people started focusing on just that part of reparations and not seeing a potential bigger picture. So over the course of months, there had been an ad hoc committee that had developed, consisting of community members, organizing to figure out what is needed in community and to identify other sources of funding. As a result of that, the Evanston Community Foundation, with the assistance of myself and the alderman and 3 other community leaders, were able to establish a fund, a reparations fund at the Evanston Community Foundation. There are actually 2 separate funds, one for immediate use and one for long-term corpus development. And what we hope to do is put more money into corpus development so we can use the interest from that to run programming or react to things that are needed, new ideas that are needed, such as what to do, how the money can be addressing issues with education gap, with job training, with cultural awareness, with housing. These things that the community members in Evanston historically have been promoting and fighting for since I can historically remember as early as 1905 when newspaper articles in Evanston began to appear with the headline, "The Jim Crowing of Evanston," how to a fast growing Black community and how can we get rid of it. So all of these reports were coming out at this time. So the gist of reparations in general is to try and find remedies and programming that help correct the harm that has been caused to the Black community over the last 10 decades. And how can we fix that through programming or through direct action? There are a group of people that just say, just cut us a check and every Black resident a check in the community, but that's impractical. So let's say even if we did the math with $10 million and divide that up among all the Black residents in Evanston, that amounts to about $88.73. That doesn't make any sense at all. What does make sense is actually creating programming that can actually benefit a large swath of the community. Some ideas that are floating around is that every Black graduate from Evanston Township High School has a free ride scholarship to college or to a trade school. Forgiving business loans, forgivable business loans to start a business. Monies to incentivize training of local residents to work in Evanston. Home retention, whether it's improving your home, purchasing a home, or renters who want to purchase a home. All these things that are that we can track through our findings and reporting and what other organizations are doing. I'm going to paste a bunch of links in the chat area that you can pull from. And hopefully if you save that, I think you can save the chat and you're able to save all those links, but you'll see a variety of links there. One organization called OPAL, Organization for Positive Action and Leadership. They're a website that tracks a lot of stats about the achievement gap in education and police force and how the people of color in Evanston are heavily policed. And the percentages show that we're such a small percentage of the Evanston population, but we're heavily policed over very small infractions that help further a narrative that a Fifth Ward is dangerous when it actually, and statistically, it really isn't. There's also 2 links to city websites, the Evanston Reparations and the Reparations Subcommittee. The Reparations Subcommittee has posted meetings which are open to the community. You can tune in via Zoom at any time. And there is also a helpful resource that I penned called Evanston Policies and Practices Directly Affecting the African-American Community from 1900 to 1960. It's a working document in draft form right now. It's about 75 pages of a historical context of inequities that affected the Black community in Evanston. And this is something that the city of Evanston asked Shorefront to put together. So that what was happening with me personally is that I started getting dozens of phone calls every week asking specific questions about the inequities that happen within the African community in education, in policing, in housing, demographics, all these things that are asked over and over again. And the city of Evanston was also getting these questions as well. And the city assistant manager and the attorney asked Shorefront to put together a report that shows the evidence, not necessarily support Shorefront, I mean, not support reparations, but show evidence of inequities so that people could make informed decisions of where to move forward. And we had to structure it that way because, Shorefront's a nonpartisan, non-political entity. However, recently I've had to argue that a lot of times when you're dealing with Black history in the United States, it often falls on politics. If you really think about it, we have been politicized ever since we were, kidnapped from Africa and sold into slavery here in the United States, with laws being passed to govern our bodies and our lives throughout the entire history of the United States. So my very presence has become a political issue. So I did have to argue that point for a while, which has a lot of validity. We couldn't exist if it wasn't for what's been happening. That's my little commentary there, so sorry, thank you for dealing with that. But this policy has proven to be very beneficial for the city of Evanston to help structure policies and ideas and programs moving forward with reparations funds. And this is something we're not for enforcing people to pay out of taxes. It's not coming at a loss from anyone, but it's providing an opportunity and template that the entire globe is watching right now. So not only local newspapers are writing about that, we have two independent film producers, Vice and an independent group led by Erica Alexander. For those who might be a TV sitcom fan of Living Single, she played Maxine on that, but now she has a production company and she's documenting the reparations program here. And recently, the work of reparations in Evanston has been profiled in The Guardian magazine. It's a European magazine. So we have hit global news of what Evanston is trying to do with reparations. It's hard. I will not say any of this work is easy. And just for full disclosure, running Shorefront is not my full-time job. I volunteer to do this. I don't get paid to do this. I do it out of love. In fact, I'm working from home remotely, and behind me you see boxes on that desk back there. Those are archival boxes I've been collecting since COVID shut down, just dealing with reparations and some other projects that we're working on remotely from with Shorefront. So I work full-time at Northwestern University in production as a graphic designer. But my avocation is history and running Shorefront. So I don't get any personal benefit from this. I'm doing this for the concern and the growth of a community I have fallen in love with, living my life here for the last 40 years. So I lived most of my life here in Evanston and have really deeply invested in the history of Evanston, how history repeats itself, and how history informs what we moving forward. So I think from there I'll stop and maybe answer questions or comments or observations.
I want to clarify. I don't know if I'm muted or what.
No, you're fine. I hear you.
We hear you.
We are talking about looking back at the history of Evanston and what has been done in Evanston and reparations related specifically to that. And I just see that as an incredibly wonderful model for other cities. But if you try to go, if you say, let's think about reparations for slavery, for the harm that was done to Black people when before the country was even a country, then it seems so overwhelming. But if you talk about one city and what it did or didn't do, and you try to address that, that seems much more manageable to me.
I think it's manageable in a way to wrap your brain around it. So you can see a direct cause and effect in a very small footprint.
Mhm.
And that's why the nation's watching Evanston right now, because they're trying to see what they can do in their own communities and how the United States government can actually proceed as well. So you have other places, North Carolina and South Carolina are starting to look at it. California now are looking at their own reparations program. But what we also found is that their resolutions that they're passing are not really a program yet. They're just passing a resolution to talk about it. And actually, that's the impetus of HR 40, the congressional resolution. It's only really to talk and study it, nothing else. I mean, how much more study do we have to do? We have we have a ton of stuff and a ton of proof that's already there. And what seems to happen is the age-old tactic of this delay, this say now is not the right time, or we have too many other things to deal with, or the cost is astronomical. How do we calculate that? Who benefits from this?
Yeah.
Well, everybody of color, in the United States should benefit from this. And the longer prolong it, the costlier it's going to be.
I want to pipe in about, the tendency to, I'll call it procrastinate it. I think it's more sinister than that. But the ELCA, for those of you who are part of my congregation or who are Lutheran, we as the ELCA are in conversations about reparation as well. There's a pastor who recently wrote a book. He also recently moved out to Portland, Oregon. His name is Lenny Duncan. And he wrote a book called Dear Church, a love letter from a Black preacher to the whitest denomination in the country, which is us, which is the ELCA. And so that's a great book that I commend to all of you. And I also commend to you to just look him up and read some of the articles he's been posting. He has been pushing for reparations in the ELCA for us as a denomination, because just as the city of Evanston has, structurally disadvantaged people, so has our denomination. And so he has been pushing for change in that. And one of the things he's been told for years now is, oh, we're studying it. We're studying it. Shh, just wait. Shh, we're going to get to it. We're working on it. We're thinking about it. We're looking into it. And he just kind of keeps getting told to shush, that we're handling it. And there's never any update on anything ever being done or discussed, or, it just keeps being, we're talking about it. And so this is a big issue for us as a denomination as well, to start thinking about, for churches who haven't started thinking about it, and for churches who have started thinking about it, like start actually acting on these things. So I invite everybody to look into the need for reparations and the call for reparations in our church denomination as well.
If we think about these major corporations in the United States, they all had their initial investments through slavery and through the backs of the African-American body. Universities started because of that. Sometimes towns have been developed because of it. But these corporations that we love and banking institutions have developed because of it. So all these institutions are implicated in this. If it wasn't for the enslaved, the slave economy, a lot of these corporations would never have existed. They're still benefiting from to this day. So there are a couple of universities that are trying their hand at reparations. Georgetown, I think, is one of them. I can't remember the other two, but they one university increased their tuition by a certain percentage, where that percentage goes into a reparations holding fund, so that over time, all incoming African-American freshmen have free right tuition into the university. There is a town in Florida for the last, I think, 10 years now, have put together a program already for African American graduates from their local high school. If they attend a state-supported college or university in Florida, they have a free ride tuition to go there.
Dino, I have a question about, you provided us a wealth of information to open our eyes to many different aspects of this. And I wanted to get a handle on, I guess, just one area to help me better understand it rather than trying to tackle everything here. One of the areas you mentioned was a large police presence, especially the African American community there. I also live in the 5th Ward of Evanston, and I've seen more than enough police come for smaller things. And I wanted to get your, this is a national issue as well with the police presence. Do you think that it is a misunderstanding when you think, when you hear that, let me see if I can verbalize this question.
Don't worry about political. I say this. Don't worry about political correctness. I say we're among friends. Try and get your information.
You mentioned that you know, particularly African American, or you can say that the 5th Ward has a strong police presence that's overly strong amount. But if you ask the police in Evanston, is that true? Do they act in a different way? Do they think that it's has more crime or something like that? And if you get their opinion about things, do they agree that they have a overly amount of police presence there? I think.
I'm sorry. Keep
I'm
going.
sorry. And just to finish this up here, I mean, we're talking about reparations, but if we can fix the issue first and then provide reparations, I think it's. I think it's we need two hands here to deal with.
I think, with that, multiple hands are needed at the same time. There was discussion at one point about let's do some race and reconciliation first. And I said, well, that's like putting out a fire. I mean, if my house is on fire, you don't keep me in the house while it's burning while you think about putting the fire out. You put the fire out, period. Then think about how we can prevent fires in the future. So with the police, what we found with the police is that there are a lot of police employees that do not live in the community or within Evanston. They're coming from all over the suburban area. They have no investment in Evanston whatsoever other than getting a paycheck and their pension and leaving. So when new police staff members come in, one of their first beats as a newly inducted police officer to police in Evanston is normally the night shift in the 5th Ward. So when you already start there, and remember that map I showed you with like the least desired area to work in Evanston, you have people that come in, unfortunately, with a preconceived notion of what Evanston is and what they're dealing with, not understanding that this is a community that have roots and generational family members. So I'm sure everybody here heard, the term 6 degrees of separation. Evanston is like half a degree of separation. So a lot of things can be resolved just by calling a family member and say, hey, your family member is acting out. You need to stop that. It'll get resolved really quick. So what we have, and I'll give you actually a good example of something that actually happened to me just a year ago. So I live in the 5th Ward, right on the edge of the 5th and 2nd Ward, right across from the high school. And I have a 2-flat apartment. Next door to me, I have a bungalow house that has been converted to 3 units. And family members live in there. So the way they're able to rent out everything is that they're all related to each other. So they can live on the front half of the house, the rear half of the house, and the basement. And next door to me, I have another 3-flat that is not necessarily a good construction. Nobody likes it, but it's there. But it rotates a lot with renters. So apparently, in this newer construction building, The police got a call of a domestic disturbance in the basement unit. So my daughter wakes me up at 3 o'clock in the morning because she said there are a whole bunch of police outside of our building. And she heard a big bang. Now, my daughter had a friend of hers sleeping over, and normally, they go down to our basement area. So finished, but actually, I'm sitting in the finished basement area. I have 2 other rooms. I have like a living room and stuff like that. But this is my office during the daytime. But my daughter, who's 20 years old, is her hangout place with her friends and sleepover space. So normally, my daughter's down there sleeping over. Fortunately, this time they were not downstairs. Well, apparently, what happens is that big bang was a police officer kicking in the back door of my building and going into the basement to look for this domestic disturbance. So I'm waking up sleepy-eyed. I'm going to the front window, and there are 9 squad cars out in front of our building, lights all over our building, and police running around like Keystone Cops. It's kind of hilarious a little bit, but scary at the same time. So I was smart enough to stay in my building, and I crack open the window and say, "Police, what's going on?" And they immediately start yelling and trying to light in the windows saying, "Who's in the basement? Who's in the basement? Let us in. There's a domestic service. Who's in the basement?" I'm like, "Nobody's in the basement. It's my unit, but nobody lives in the basement. And nobody is down there. What are you talking about?" "Well, we got a call about a domestic disturbance." They're still yelling and still running around. And I finally said, "Well, what's the address?" The address was for next door. So I said, "You have the wrong address. It's next door. And with all the commotion you've been doing for the last 10 minutes, I'm sure the perpetrators got away. They probably just walked right by you and you didn't even realize it." So I had to call the police. I went to the back door. Door was kicked in. The police officer was there saying, "I'm sorry this happened. Here's my card." They paid for the repairs. 6 months later, I actually did a presentation at the police station about the history of the Black community and its connectivity and its work within the police department, policing in Evanston. Afterwards, there were some reviews that were sent in. Some were very interested in local history and they learned a lot. Others are strictly to the book. This does not fit form, code, blah, blah, blah. So therefore it's irrelevant to teach in this police training. So we don't care. That's what one of the reviewers did say. One of the police officers did come up to me afterwards and said, "I was the guy that kicked in your back door. I apologize." I said, "Well, listen to this scenario." And as I explained, some daughter sleeps down there. I would have waken up to my daughter screaming and her friend screaming. I would have ran downstairs to see what's going on into a situation where there's an armed police down there trying to respond to something, even though it's at a wrong address, trying to respond to something. They're going to see me as an angry Black man coming down and they're going to fear for their life and something could have happened to me. Is that a good assessment? And that police officer nodded his head. So that's the state we're working in, where is the perception of danger first, and not service to a community. So for a long time, I think on the side of police cars, it says to serve and protect. For a long time, I always said that has been an incomplete sentence. For me and for a lot of people in the Black community, the sentiment is pretty much the same. The sentence should read to serve and protect white people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's what it plays out over and over again. Other stories like that happened with my time living in Evanston. My parents were upper middle class. My dad was a VP at a major bank in downtown Chicago. My mom was a high-ranking teacher at an elementary school in Glenview. We moved to Evanston on Sheridan Road. We lived there for 15 years. And every year without fail, I was stopped by the police, accused of casing the neighborhood and told to go home. And I'm playing on the front lawn of my own home.
Yeah. So how do you process that as a young person? How did you personally process that? Was it just fatalism, or was it anger, or what do you do with that?
Well, I think there are always certain paths you can go down. And unfortunately, my first run-in about with race and race relations, I was in kindergarten. And I had to learn how to deal with issues with race at that early age.
Yeah.
And so over the course of time, when I thought about that period of time, I had 3 choices. I can either become reclusive and, and not respond and be despondent in the classroom setting. I could lash out in anger, or I could use it to empower myself. And I had to deal with this and think about this in kindergarten. So
Oh,
I had an early introduction, and a lot of people of color have an early introduction to dealing with race much earlier than anybody else has to, or other groups, predominantly white population in general. But having to deal with that, or I'm sure some of you heard the term like having a talk with your parents, like when you go out, how to conduct yourself, when the police stop you, how to conduct yourself. How many of you had that discussion with your family? But that was a discussion I had immediately. I mean, as soon as I hit 12, 13 years old, my parents were talking to me about that.
sure.
So how to conduct, and no matter what I did or no matter what I do, I'm still going to be perceived as the enemy. Walking on the sidewalk and seeing subtleties like somebody crossing the street to avoid me, or clutching their purse, or going to the elevator and seeing everybody kind of back up away from me and around me. There are little subtleties. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but these subtleties play out through culture in the United States. You see this reinforcement in a lot of subtle ways in TV commercials, in representation in media. If you watch the news, if a crime happens in the news, and if it's a person of color, you're immediately going to see that mugshot, the most least flattering shot of that person. You're going to see where they live. You're going to interview family members. You're going to try and find somebody that is as quote unquote animated as possible to help describe that situation. If it's somebody white doing the same crime, you do not see that person's image until days later. And when you do, you're going to see this beautiful cultured photograph of a person like in a graduation cap or at communion or doing community service. So you see a distinct difference of how people are perceived, and it reinforces that stereotype. Or you have two kids doing the same exact crime with the same background, one white and one black, and I guarantee the black person is going to have a higher crime sentence than the white kid will have. It happens consistently, and that's charted and that's documented. That happens over and over again. So we see these things, but we choose to ignore it. And even bring up today with Black Lives Matter now, these things that community members are protesting have been going on for decades. What's making it more evident is the use of social media and smartphones with cameras and movie capabilities, and they have the ability to post it immediately. So people are watching in real time what is happening to them. So that's what's changing. That's what's doing this resurgence again. Just like in the civil rights movement, everybody did not pay attention to civil rights through the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. It wasn't until TV was starting to broadcast hoses and dogs being turned on teenagers while they're fighting for just the basic humanistic rights of voting, or sitting at a lunch counter to eat, or living in a neighborhood, or just walking down the street minding their own businesses.
Van, were you, I thought it looked like you might be piping up. I
Yes,
think it was back.
I
Do you remember what you
I'm
were going to
sorry.
say?
did. I said in the beginning, I'm from Wilmette, and I've been in Wilmette for 13 years. Evanston just before Wilmette. I was drawn to this particular meeting this morning because I read that title, North Shore and Changing North Shore. And it has become more and more interesting to me that the line between Evanston and Wilmette is drastic. As you move up from Evanston to all of the North Shore, you see practically no people of color, no African Americans. And I'm a member of two organizations you may have heard or may not have heard of them. One is Race Awareness in the North Shore. The other is Healing Everyday Racism in Our Schools. It started concentrating on Nutria, but now it has, since the group is called HEROES, Healing Everyday Racism in Our School. It was one of the co-sponsors of a march that many people participated in just after George Floyd was killed. It started at Nutria, at the Winnetka campus, main campus. And it went on up after a session there, it went on up to the park in Winnetka for a further thing. Anyway, many people, we thought maybe 58 people would come. It was thousands of white people who came, which is a wonderful thing. But it also, we've found more and more that throughout the North Shore, there is a similar problem. And that problem is no welcoming to people of color, no housing, particularly for people of color. And if you're living in Wilmette, you know, the village the village council has been having some hearings, but now it is proposing to reinstitute its Human Relations Commission and its Housing Commission. And what we have in common all over the United States is what Dino mentioned very early, the redlining. We're in an area that is supposed to be white. It's supposed to be upper class. It started that way, and it maintained that. And I know, you know, Dino could talk about it. Glencoe, originally a city where Black people could live in the North Shore, but most were help.
Mhm.
And then look at what has happened to Glencoe. That except for the church, very few Black people live there now.
And that was by design.
Now it's gentrification. So the issue of looking at race, particularly in the North Shore, is a deep one that we need to start. Even as we think about reparations, we need to start figuring out, because each of these groups that I'm a member of, another group is Together is Better Alliance. It's more Chicago based. But what we're finding, and this is going to be true everywhere where there are communities like this, is that you can't integrate the schools if there's nobody to integrate it with. You can't, if your housing is all white,
Mhm. Mhm.
you'll never have this experience. You'll just hear about it and hear others talk about it. So where do we, as a community, begin to think about what we can do? And then what we can do is hard. So how can we support getting things done? Like, if you're going to think of housing in the North Shore, I say to the groups I go to on race, you know, there's housing that's affordable for Black people, even in Wilmette. It's just nobody living in them. White people are living in them. And you can, if you live in Wilmette, you know, where there are apartments, there are townhouses, old town, surely people of color could live there. But our tradition has been, we maintain what we have. So this is a very deep subject that will require more than just hearing about it. But it'll require, how are we going to engage in trying to make it different if we can? That's very hard, but it's a challenge. I saw Gail Schechter's name as I saw your, and I know Gail has been for a long time working on open housing, and I went to all kinds of hearings way back when it was the affordable housing talk, And that was so hard here in Wilmette. When I heard people say at the hearings, we don't want to bring um, single mothers with a lot of children here. We don't want to have men on drugs. I heard we don't want poor black women with a whole lot of children coming up here messing up our community. And what I heard was, and we don't want any black men on drugs when there's just as many people up here in the North Shore, young people who are white, who are on drugs. They're in our families.
Yeah.
So the subject is a deep subject. And even as I listened to about Evanston, you know, when I moved here, and still, I have a little community in Evanston, but when I want to get my hair cut, I go there to get my hair cut. When I moved here, I was stopped a lot by the police. And it wasn't because I looked like I couldn't possibly be here. I was black, a black man driving a car from the west side of Wilmette to the east side of Wilmette, going to the Baha'i Temple every day. My office is there in the temple. I get stopped. I get stopped for a light being out on my license plate. I got stopped for going 40 in a 35-mile zone on Linden when everybody else was doing that too. So you see, the problem of race is so deep and so difficult to discuss because it requires us to break out of an old habit. Me too, all of us, out of an old habit. And so I'm glad to see you all are having this because I try to now be present. I used to not be present. I used to just try to not let this bother me. Just go do my job. Do my job. Don't get in too deeply involved. And I can't take one more black man getting killed and a video running showing us the man being killed. I don't know that I can take it. I don't want to fear going out. I don't want to fear looking in my rearview mirror and seeing a policeman and scared. And I'm an old black man. I'm probably as old as all of you.
Nope.
No.
You got to be 80 if you're going to be older than me.
We're there with you.
Hey, there.
And you know, I shouldn't have to worry. I shouldn't have to worry. I was involved in the civil rights movement. I sat in at the lunch counters at Woolworths in Greensboro, North Carolina. That's where I was born. I lived in segregated America. And it wasn't easy to be where I am. And surely it took a lot of acting along the way, learning how to move forward, learning how to be accepted, learning how to be not feared if possible. So I don't want to say more. I just wanted to say there is something here that we can be thinking about. And Allison, you said it early too. You know, we often in the civil rights movement, we used to say, and this is still true, on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock is the most segregated time in America.
Yeah.
And if we want to add Jews, one of the next places is Friday night. Friday, most segregated. We're segregated. Now, you know, our hearts, I think, are changing and becoming more and more pure. It takes now how to take that and do something with it. And it's hard. So we may not see it. Any of us may not see all this. Reparations is hard for people to even think about. They say, well, what does that mean? That's what we're talking about. Well, that means we're going to give people something. I didn't realize until now that many years I've paid for a house that on paper was about the same price as the houses next to me. But I was paying a huge percentage rate. I didn't know. It took somebody to file a complaint years later, and I get something from the bank saying, oh, you're a part of the group that we discriminated against. They didn't use those words, but that's what they were telling me. So many Black people have done that. How many veterans who came back from the war and could not get subsidized housing like all the other veterans got, who are in all of your backgrounds, probably.
Right. It's something that parts of the reparations money needs to go for, is in terms of historical documentation, the way that Blacks have been directly discriminated against, and things that were post-slavery that white people got when they homesteaded. They got their land for free or for very reduced rates, and they were part of the GI Bill and had their education mostly subsidized, until you start looking back as an adult now. I didn't hear anything. I just assumed everybody got this.
Yeah.
It's only now that I'm finding out, oh my God. I mean, I know what that has meant to American society as a whole, to be able to start to, because most of our people are immigrants and come here with nothing. And that's the way they advanced the family, was through things like this. But unless this is taught as part of education, that you find out that no, not everybody got to use these historical facts, that it's more than just slavery that reparations need to be made for, because it's all these opportunities which people of color were not part of.
And even when these opportunities were developed within the Black community on its own accord, I think all of us here in this meeting has heard of the Tulsa race riots. What a lot of people don't know, that there were dozens of Tulsas throughout the United States that were violently taken away from the Black community. One that's making more research now is the Slocum Massacre, where an entire village was literally marched to their death and shot and killed in a ravine, and the bones stay there to this day. Florida has a couple of communities like that, of mass, with acts of violence, basically destroying and taking away community. Along the ocean front in various communities, and some of the islands off the coast of South Carolina are being taken away from Black communities that have lived there and developed those lands themselves. That's happening to this day, today. This is not like in the past, this is happening today. As we talk about, housing in the North Shore, just remember, I mean, if you understand the term of sundown towns, Illinois once had over 1,000 sundown towns. Kenilworth is established as a sundown town. To this day, there's still about 200 sundown towns in the state of Illinois today. Most of us heard of Cicero. I mean, imagine what Cicero was like, where if you're a person of color, try going in there and establishing a residence, you can get ran out of town. That's basically what a sundown town does. So these things
I
are
don't
still
even know what that means. What
I'm
is
sorry.
that?
So sundown down basically means is as direct as that term means. If you're a person of color and if you're in a town at sundown, you have to leave. If you don't leave, a couple of things could happen. Some best case scenario is that you're just ran out of town or escorted out of town by the police. Worst case scenario is that you basically disappear. I mean, somebody kidnap you and murder.
I'm leaving my, I'm leaving my.
So that's what a sundown town is. And so when Kenilworth was first established, in its original charter, it's said to have stated large lots, no alleys, no sidewalks, and no Negroes. That's how it was first established. They changed it quickly because they realized that, wait, we want to have domestics working for us, so we'll allow Negroes to work in the houses, but they cannot stay overnight.
Oh, that's what that means. All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
One parting words with this too is when we talk about reparations and what the remedies are, our city mayor at the very beginning made a statement that always stuck with me. And it makes sense. And this is the intensity you have to really pursue this is. It's, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, we have to be just as intentional in remedying these atrocities as we were in preventing Black families from engaging in the United States.
You know, I really appreciate your time. And I also want to thank Van for stepping up and sharing some of his stories as well.
Absolutely.
It was so powerful to hear both of your personal stories and also to hear some insight into the work that you're doing. I think that I, as well as probably others in our congregation, have a lot to learn and have a lot of, you know, creativity that we need to engage in to think about how we can, you know, be intentional now and as these things continue and as we try to make amends for things that have happened in the past. So thank you.
Can I say one last thing that keeps on some pop in my mind? And Van, thank you for bringing this up a little bit too about, you know, drug problem in the North Shore. And it reminded me of an article that came out in Time magazine back in the 90s. The perception is probably still is to this day that they, you know, a lot of families in the North Shore think that Evanston Township is like the drug haven because of its population. However, Time magazine had an article about the issue of tremendous drug crime at New Trier. And so it wasn't Evanston Township that had the issue, it was New Trier. And I think it was called like a model school struggles with vexing national issue, kids on pot. And it was basically, the headline of the Times magazine was called High Times at New Trier High.
Wow.
Pastor Allison,
Yes.
do we have email addresses for our two guests so that we can continue the conversation with them?
Wonderful question. Yes, I have Dino's contact information. If you all are interested in emailing him personally to thank him, you're very welcome. He just posted it in the chat. And then Van was a guest today, and you, no pressure to share your contact information, but if you'd like to send that to me privately, or if you would want to share it to the group, you're very welcome to do that. I would love to speak with you again if you end up having time or are open to that. So thank you.
I am going to put my email address there, and I'm experimenting with something that has taken wing, it seems. Once a month on Wednesday evening, the third Wednesday evening of each month, I have this is something that I was just really experimenting with. It starts with first prayer. So, you know, we have to have a prayer from every religious tradition that I can find scripture from to just get us in the right mode. But then 4, 5, 6, 7 Black people are asked 4 questions. and they've come prepared to answer these 4 questions. And I just added this last, the 19th of the month, I added white people answering questions as well. And the questions like, when did you first realize that race was a problem? Did you do anything about it? What did you do? Do you have a black friend if it's a white person? So anyway, this last time, 260 people registered, 180 showed up. They were from 5 countries and 28 states. So, and as a Baha'i, I was doing it, but it's really an individual initiative. It's not. It's for everybody. So folk who are there are from different walks of life. They're different colors, different whatever. And it now is I said this last time. It's like the tail wagging the dog. I'm trying something, and all of a sudden it is taken on. I mean, it's about to be done in the library at Northbrook, and maybe even at Glenview. But it's to hear some of these deep things from both people who are black and both people who are white. And of course, with that many people, doesn't get a chance to speak. You just get a chance to kind of hear this going on. Non-threatening. People say, "Oh, please," and people have registered for next month, and I haven't even planned next month. So I'll put my email address, and if you feel like you're interested in that, you might want to do it. And it's local. Some of the people are from Wilmette. In fact, there are a group of us, 27, that went to Montgomery, Alabama, before all this stuff took place. It was supposed to be an all-white group, and 5 of us who are African Americans joined the group. Dino, I'm sure you know Laurie Goldstein over at the Reconstruction. She was doing it. She was putting it together. But we went and we saw how wrong our history is, and how we have learned to believe a narrative that is not true. All of us, black and white. And we came back and we are friends. There's a certain bonding that took place as we even prepared to go there. I wasn't sure I wanted to go with white people, but I did. And it turned out to be an unbelievable trip. So several of us are the core as well of this thing I have on Wednesday.
That would be wonderful. I want to close out our meeting because I already have taken 15 minutes of Dino's time that was unscheduled. So thank you for staying. I'd love to close this with a prayer. Holy God, as we look back on the history that has brought us to where we are today, we mourn and we lament the evil that has been done, often in your name, often in the name of security or safety. And this evil dehumanizes groups of people, and therefore it dehumanizes people who have the image of God within them. We ask that you might give us the strength to stay connected to these conversations. Give us the strength to keep listening, to keep showing up. And even when we don't know the answers and we don't even see what the way forward is going to be, give us the grit to continue showing up and continuing to have faith that you will offer a way. Please bless today Dino Robinson, bless the work of Shorefront Legacy Center, and bless the work of the reparations group in Evanston. May their work continue to be fruitful and be a blessing to the community. I also ask that you may bless Van. Thank you for the gift of his story and for the gift of his work, both his ministry and his personal work on racial justice issues. May he be brought comfort and joy, and may he find the community and love that we all so desperately need. Oh God, I ask that we might continue to meditate on these things as we go about our day and our week. Please keep us safe and let us be compassionate and loving towards one another. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for having me today. It was a privilege and a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks, Dino. All right. Adios.
Thanks, everybody.